Hello and welcome back to It Ain't Broke, internet review show in somebody's front room. Today we're talking about Irving Kershner. Because we're talking about Irving Kershner's sequel, Robocop 2, a film that's much kind of maligned in certain quarters, but I think it's got its own merits. Here's a clip.
Hit the gas, Murphy.
The posted limit is 35. We should set an example, Anne. Your hair looks lovely that way.
It's OCP. They did something to you.
I'm fine.
So Duncan, why don't you give us a quick rundown of what Robocop 2 is all about?
Well, it's in terms of its plot, it's about drugs. It's about a drug lord and about a corporation's desire to make the next big thing. It's about personal ambition. Thematically, though, and this is something we unpacked not so long ago, I feel, but there was thematically, it manages to be quite meta about the something being a victim of its own success and something having to be mass marketed and thus be completely misunderstood and have all of its
and the pressure to improve something in the eyes of the public.
Exactly, and to market it to a wider audience and therefore kids, and there's a really nice commentary that runs through it that's about that. And as far as the character himself, it puts him in an interesting place. I mean, it starts off in an interesting place with him and his wife, and him having to, for her sake, let her go. It does sort of lose that thread a bit in terms of like it's because obviously at the end of the first film he's Murphy again, kind of, but not really. And in this one it's like, well, you get the impression that he is because he's able to be like, look, I'm.
My frustration with it is that it kind of takes all that stuff and kind of goes like,
yeah.
Big robots and drug lords,
yeah,
that, because that's one of the best scenes in the franchise. That when he actually meets his wife, it's a really powerful, amazing performance as well.
Yeah.
I think this is the thing. Now I think Mike Stokelaser said that Robocop 2 is a diamond in the rough, and I didn't want to just say it was a diamond in the rough and then seem like I was just ripping off of those guys. We did a commentary about it a while ago. It is a rough diamond. I think it needed a bit more work. It was essentially Frank Miller made a splash as a comic book writer on Ronin. They brought him in to write Robocop 2. He had no experience with screenwriting, so he wrote this insane 300-page whale of a thing, which was then taken and split in two, essentially, and what we ended up with Robocop 2 and 3. We're not here to talk about Robocop 3. So it has the Frank Miller aesthetic in that it's kind of like hyperbolic and mean and a bit crazy. And I think that one of the complaints leveled against it is that it's a bit too mean-spirited, and that is true. I think it needed a bit more development. It's not as good as the first one at all. Of course it isn't. No. But taken on its own merits, because a lot of the narrative is that it's a terrible, terrible film, and it's not. Taken on its own merits, it's really well performed. Daniel O'Harely gets to do so much more as the old man in this, and he's fucking hilarious.
It's very different.
Yeah, he's like straight up evil in this, whereas he's definitely not a nice man in the first one, but he's kind of thrown into shade by Dick Jones and you don't see him so much.
That's true, yeah.
And you're kind of warm to him because it's kind of like, nice shooting, son, what's your name? All, happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock. But he's given so much more to do, Johnson as well. And of course, the double team of Murphy and Lewis. Loads of great interplay. Loads of great comics. The comedy stuff in it is really good and really well handled. The action scenes are really great. Phil Tippett is back doing kind of go motion-y puppet stuff, which is really good. Like the Kane robot looks really great. Probably the most famous scene from the whole film is the prototype scene. That is often taken in isolation, and it's a brilliant, brilliant scene. Yeah. As you were saying earlier, and my theory is that it's a meta commentary on sequels, and I might be reading into it too much, but it's so about that, and it even reacts to Robocop being toned down for kids. It shows that you can't go back to the same world twice. It shows that making something bigger doesn't necessarily make it better, which is in a way a callback to the SOX 9000 and stuff. I think there's a lot going on, and it does take on again the kind of corporatism stuff. It's a bit heavy-handed in that, like, the OCP flags are literally Nazi banners and stuff. But, like, it's a bit much, but you know,
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's funny because it's obviously it's made by Irving Kershner, who arguably made one of the best second movie or sequels out there, one of the most substantive. So you've got to wonder. I mean, you've got to think there must be some kind of it must be knowing that that's what he's doing. For me, it all comes down to that boardroom scene where they're trying to decide how to redo Robocop so he's more kid friendly, and it's like, can he say good messages about whatever? And so obviously he literally gets his nuts chopped off pretty much because he gets reprogrammed to be like, you know.
Well, he literally, it's like what would happen if you actually tried to make the cartoon version of the character.
Yeah.
Which they did do, of course. But like it's like if you were to make the PG-13 Robocop, and it's like he's got to help people over the road and stuff, and then that plays into. It's quite funny. It's kind of, it's not an inverse, but it's a play on the scene from the original movie. Like one of the best bits of the original film is when he hits the streets for the first time as a cop and goes on the beat, and it's like the fucked version of that.
Yeah.
Because like he goes out and he just can't function and stuff, and you know he can't do anything properly. He gets the piss taken out of him by kids. He nearly kills a guy for smoking.
Yeah, he's just like completely like heavy-handed with that, and yeah. It's like a bird in the bush, or whatever. It's like,
a rolling stone is worth two in the bush.
And he's just saying fucking things that they put in his head. Like it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah. I'm having trouble.
I've said this before, but me and my good friend Nick, when one of us was like so drunk they were being sick, and if you walked in on that person being sick, that person's responsibility was to go, I'm having trouble. Which we quite, considering the state we're in sometimes, is quite good going.
That's impressive,
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble. I think where it suffers for me, it's really interesting because actually if you break down the Robocop, the first three, which is a thing we can say now, they carry over a lot of the crew behind the scenes. Like the Robo team were back doing the suit with Robo team. Rocco Joffrey was doing the matte paintings again. Phil Tippett was back doing the kind of stop motion, whatnot. There's a few cast. I think it definitely suffers from the lack of Basil Polidorus. Leonard Roseman's score is nice, but the Robocop theme is such a strong theme. It's so conspicuous by its absence, and the new one is a Robocop. And if you listen to the credits, it actually has a choir singing Robocop, which is a bit like fucking hell. But you know, Roseman did like Star Trek 4, and he did really good music there. And considering who he was up against in terms of the sequels there, you know, he held his own in my view. The music's nice, but I think if you were to rescore this with Basil Polidorus music, it would work so much better. And this is what I find weird, and all three Robocop films do this, despite everything being behind the scenes quite a lot of consistency. All of the ancillary cast change every film, i.e. the other cops, and the police precinct changes every time, because each one, I can't remember, it's like Dallas, Atlanta, so they're all different cities that they're filmed in. And it really shows. So like when you see the police precincts in each film, it's a completely different building. And all the cops running around in the background are just completely different people, and and the music's different, and the cinematography's cleaner, and the suit is kind of blue.
It's blue,
which I think looks kind of cool actually. It's policey, but it's this strange half and half of, you've got all this stuff that's still the same, and then all this stuff that's just changed. And
I don't mind, there's a suit thing I don't mind, because obviously he's all shot up at the end of the first one, so it's kind of like, well, I get they'd remake his
I just kind of think it looks cool. It looks policey.
It totally makes sense. But no, I take your point. There's not been that concept, but it's true of so many films. It's the same with the Dark Knight trilogy. It's like from one to the next, there's no, I don't feel there's much for continuity in terms of, and it's by design, you know. I mean, I know in that instance, Chris Nolan, who was the same director through all of them, was very like, no, the inspiration is different for each one. So, you know, you can't fault it for that, but it's that, I think with the Robocop ones, I mean, I take your point. I do think there's, one of the things that gets leveled, that it gets criticised for a lot is the kid. And it's like, he's a kid, and he's swearing, and he's being like, and it's like, yeah, but there was a lot of that at the time. I remember I don't really remember the 80s too well, because I was 6 by the time it was over. But there was still that thing of like kids being bad, you know what I mean? Like that's where the whole appeal for The Simpsons came from. That's where.
And this, I think this is part of the rub
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, oh, well, Bart Simpson's got a slingshot, and it's like, oh, well, Hob has a drugs empire.
Yeah.
Like, because it's kind of horrible, and he dies in Robocop's arms and stuff, because it's not... The kind of thing I think people are complaining about is what's done in Robocop 3, where there's the cute kid sidekick.
Yeah.
Whereas in Robocop 2, it's the kind of antithesis of that. It's the opposite. And he has guns,
Yeah.
he has money, he has drugs, he wears his little suit, and he dies as well.
Well, he faces the consequences of it, which is a good thing. That's where I give it a pass, because if he'd just been going around being a little dick and shooting people and doing what he does, and then never face the, you know, because we couldn't possibly have him face the consequences of it, then I would have a problem with it. But the fact that he has that horrible scene where he's like, I'm, you know, dying, you've done that, right?
You know what
he's
this feels like.
Yeah, it sucks. And he's like, you know, and Robocop's literally holding his hand while he's dying, and it's like, it does something for both characters.
And it's tied into his inability to kind of see his son, who's played by a different actor in flashbacks. But you know, when he literally equates that kid to his own kid, and he's forced to sort of foregrounded in his mind.
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
Yeah,
it's all good. John Glover has a cameo at the beginning, and my kind of thesis on the two kind of, well, I think the biggest postmodern Hollywood satire of the 90s is Gremlins 2.
Right.
I think Joe Dante, I'm going to talk about that with Brad hopefully soon.
Okay.
Like,
yeah, he loves that.
Oh God, Joe Dante just absolutely nails that as a kind of postmodern statement. It's absolutely the most reflective thing. This film does something very similar, and they both have John Glover. This does not have enough John Glover, because I fucking love me some John Glover.
Yeah, man.
So he has a cameo at the beginning. I think the main thing, and an actor we talked about quite recently with Last Action Hero is Tom Noonan as Kane. And I just don't think you can beat Tom. Like Tom Noonan's an amazing actor, and I couldn't recast this.
He takes what would have been, it could have been quite an easy to cast some big, I don't know, like, because Kane is talked about, and it's like he's talked about, and you would imagine him to be this big, like, fucking drug lord, really nasty piece of work, and it's like they don't do anything to change the dialogue. It's almost like he was recast. It's like Lock, Stock with Tom, Jason's character, who's the fat jokes are made about him, because originally it was supposed to be Nick Moran, Stephen Marcus who played him.
I didn't know that. I always wondered about that fat Tom.
And they just never changed it. And it's just because, and it's still, but it still works. It's just a weird thing. And it's the same with Kane in a way, in that, like, you know, he's talked about as being someone you don't, and then you see him and it's like, he's this sort of hippie looking, but it's when it comes down to like the whole Officer Duffy being fucking gutted on the table in front of the kid. It's like, oh.
Because the way it's written, because that scene is where you see Kane for what he is, and it's just like, Jesus Christ. But in the hands of a lesser actor, it would just be slightly one note and cartoony. But Noonan gives it this kind of, because he's got this, you know, Jesus had days like this, like the kind of messianic thing.
Oh yeah. I mean, that is a great example of a line that, you know, delivery. Like, how would you find a way into that line? You know, that if you weren't Tom Noonan, if you were cast more like how you would imagine Kane to look, which is more like, I would have cast someone like, you know, the guy from The Mask. And from Heat.
And Pulp Fiction. Let's call him Zed.
Yes, Zed, who's a wonderful actor. I love him a little bit. He has such menace and such presence, and, you know, he was that go-to guy for if you needed a drug dealer or whatever, a mob boss. And you'd imagine someone like him, but then how would he be like, Jesus had days like this, like it just, and it wouldn't be his fault. It would just be like, you can't, but you put Tom Noonan in there, and it's like, obviously he's going to be like, Jesus had days like that, and, you know, he's just sort of like, I guess he's high on nuke as well, but it's that thing of,
he does that stuff. Probably my favourite, well, one of my favourite lines in the film is when Tom Noonan goes, Frank, it's got my teeth wiggling, cut it with scopolamine.
Whenever I meet someone called Frank, it's very hard, like our good friend Frank.
Oh, that is Frank Miller, by the way.
Yeah.
Just a side note. Anyway.
But yeah, I'm always like, Frank.
Cut it with Parliament.
He's like, yeah, blue red velvet, whatever it is. He's like you say, Tom Noonan is you know, very magnetic, and it's a shame we don't see more of him now. I mean, I'm not sure what he's doing now, but he's.
That's just, you would expect him. If you told me, like, because, you know, including Peter Weller, these people did like season-long turns on Dexter. Yeah. If you told me Tom Noonan had, I'd be like, absolutely cool.
So Kane as a character, this is where I find it is a bit of a stretch. It's a nice beat to have in the movie, but it's a stretch for them to be like, he's the viable alternative to Murphy, if you know what I mean, like for Robocop 2.
I like the place that comes from though.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of like she's like the I can't remember her name, Dr. Fax.
Right.
She's the outside of the box thinker, and that's where it gets her. She puts a fucking murderer in the robot, and she's kind of right to a degree. She's sort of right. Her train of thought, because it's someone. It's what you know. It worked for Murphy because he had God.
Right.
But it works for Kane because he wants to be God.
Right.
You know, she's kind of someone who would relish the power and stuff like that.
Okay.
And then, of course, it goes horribly wrong. And, you know, it's this tree of bad decisions. I kind of buy it because it's a tree of shitty decision making. And it's because she's kind of like, because the old man thinks he can get in her pants, or maybe does. He kind of goes along with it.
And she's ambitious. And it is a thing of ambition as well. There's that cautionary tale of ambition in it, although she doesn't die, does she? Although
no, she takes the fall.
Yeah.
Because like if you remember, this is the old man just being like horrifically evil. At the end, he's flanked by like Nazi flags and Nazi officers,
literally stepping over bodies and he's
he
saying that.
comes out.
Yeah.
So Daniel O'Harely is amazing in this. He just walks out and steps over the body, and he has the line. He kind of goes like, "This could look bad for OCP, Johnson. Scramble the best spin team we have." There's like there's like fleeing women getting shot in the back, and it's filmed by a TV crew, and you're just sort of going like, yeah, OCP will probably be fine, because Johnson chucks her under the bus and kind of goes like, oh well, you know, this was all her idea.
OCP's not fine though, is it? Come the third film.
Yeah,
which is a bit of a.
We can talk about that one day if you like.
Maybe.
But I find that I find it kind of irritating that it's sort of weirdly discontinuous.
Yeah.
To this one. Did you know the thing with what they kind of do with Kane in its design? The way Frank Miller, because I've read Frank Miller's fucking script like years ago, and Jesus Christ, like it's this insane fucking dense Christmas cake of it. You know what I mean? It's like a 500-ton Christmas cake. It's this insanely dense thing. Kane was called Kong. And the idea, and that's why they ascend the skyscraper at the end, because he was supposed to be, and that's why he's kind of ape-like. Yeah. He's got that kind of shark's face, but it was kind of ape-like. He was supposed to be Kong. So that kind of ascent at the end is intended as, that's a kind of meta-text thing, because it's supposed to be kind of a King Kong
I don't really know how though, because it's not like he was discovered on an island. Or
oh no! It's purely surface level. It's not.
Oh right.
Oh god, no! He's discovered.
Let's walk that back a second.
He falls in love with Lewis.
Carries her up the tower.
Oh no! It's just for the because I mean it's a name that then pays off a one-note gag.
If he'd carried Fax up the tower and then she'd fall into her death or something, that would have been a sort of.
It was something kind of a bit more. But again, you know, what we ended up with versus what was written are two different things. Yeah. So when Robocop hospitalizes Kane, Kane's in like a fighter jet. It's bonkers as fuck, man. It's completely mad. Yeah. But I really like what kind of irritates me with it is that the ending is very much a tee up for a sequel, and that kind of annoys me anyway. But the fact is, it doesn't really pay off because it's like, no, we're only human. Yeah. Because like Lewis is kind of like they're gonna have to get theirs one day, and Murphy's all like, we're only human.
Yeah. What does that even mean?
Fuck my wife, though. You're never speaking to her again.
Yeah.
It tees that up, and then Robocop 3 doesn't really satisfactorily pay that off. You just arrive, and it's all sort of just happening, and OCP's being bought out and stuff, and blah blah blah, and you're just a bit like, well.
This time it's a samurai. It's like, I think, that's the one. I think a criticism of Robocop 2 is that the Murphy character is established very well, and I like that scene with his wife, but it's just one scene, and then we don't.
Well, it's in my view, it's designed to just push that out the way because it's frustrating because I honestly think it's one of the best scenes in the film, and I just think the performances are wonderful and. You know, Weller in particular is just so good as kind of, and it's horrible. Like he's just kind of like, I don't know you and all that. It's fucking awful. But it's designed because there's too much going on, and he has to fight a drug lord. Yeah, it's designed to sort of go like, and just sort of because that's the big lingering thread. Like the end of the movie, the first movie. They make pains to make he sounds more and more human, and he resembles more a person more and more. Sure. And then he calls himself Murphy at the end. Yeah. And then in the second one, they kind of just deal with that in the first act, and off it pops.
I mean, but that's a good way to deal with it in terms of like he's making the decision to be Robocop, because how could he possibly be Murphy? It's like the thing they say about thing they say about Rocky is like the reason why Stallone cut and ended the film right there is because that's right at that's his peak. Second later and he's on the downslide, you know, because he's coming down from the thing. It's not so, and I think Robocop ends very much the same way, is that he hits that peak, but from there, where is there to go?
There was supposed to be another media break.
Right.
After that line, and it's in the deleted scene, so there was going to be a media break, and Lewis is fine, and this has happened, and that has happened. But they cut it because when they showed it to test audiences, people went nuts for the Murphy line, and then it was like, woo! Oh, okay, there's more. Okay. They had to sit and watch what was, you know.
But that's my point as well. It's like we the first Robocop it ends on, it's about Murphy, it's Murphy's thing, and so it's his journey back to him, kind of. But it's like, so you can. And I do think that scene with his wife and stuff addresses that quite nicely, because it's like him going, what was the point of that? I may know that I was Murphy and I may know all that about me, but it doesn't change the situation, and I can't be a husband or a father anymore. So for their sake, to let them move on and get closure, it's like that's a really nice thing to do. But it would be nice if that still impacted him further down the line. And I guess the scene with the kid dying. Yeah,
and also the stuff when you type it, I think it.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, like, he's given he's made to realise all this stuff by the worst people, but they are kind of right. And you can argue in this one, it's like, the first one he's rediscovering his humanity, but then the second one he has to just accept that he's Robocop.
Yeah.
Because he's not Murphy. It's not like, that was kind of the problem with the remake. He just is Murphy's head in a box.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, well, there's not really that much to get over apart from the fact that you've been, you know, I suppose kind of... Augmented, yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, you have to, you know, he's neither Murphy he's neither a man nor a machine. He's sort of something new. He's a third thing.
It wasn't an addition to him as a person. It was a rebirth of somewhat. And what is it? And what are feelings versus memories? And you know, all
is
that
it a
stuff.
Machine that dreamt he was a man, or a man that dreamt he was a machine?
Yeah,
all that. You know.
All those kind of things. So I think it does. It picks the baton up, but it drops it a couple of times throughout. And I suppose, and as well, landing on that button of "we're only human." What does that mean?
Sounds cool. Doesn't really mean anything.
In the moment, it maybe sounds cool, but it's like, as a button to land on, you kind of feel like it's just at the last minute they've dropped it, and it's just kind of because they needed another line from Robocop to end on. But if you put those two together, like Murphy, we're only human. It's like
it's nice. It is nice, but you sort of go like,
yeah. I know. Yeah, it doesn't. I don't feel like he's going anywhere from that point on.
Well, I kind of think, like, what you could have done, like, if there was no... Because this just, it speaks to the fucking state of Orion in 1990 or whatever, you know. Right. Robocop 3 sat on the shelf for ages and they had money troubles and Cutthroat Island and all that shit. Sure. Which is why it's so messy and discontinuous, you know, in my view. And I think that's kind of borne out by empirical facts. But anyway, they had to sweep aside the wife and kids stuff in Robocop 3, and in Robocop 2, and he comes to terms with the fact that probably maybe he isn't Murphy, or maybe he is. In the third film, he could have revisited that as a going concern, like maybe I can reconnect and you know, something like that. I mean, I'm not pitching you my Robocop 3. That would be a bad idea.
Here we have.
Very, very good. It's hard to know where to go after the first one, let alone the second one. I think it's almost as good as it could be. It's a diamond in the rough, but it's almost as good as it could be. Of course, it's not as good as the first one, and I get a bit irritated by the narrative that it's just bad, and it really isn't. There's quite a lot going on in it.
I think it gets tarnished with the Robocop 3 thing a lot. You know, it's because it's like there's Robocop and then there's the sequels, and it's like no, it's still smarter than just the surface level of what's going on in the plot. You know, there is more to it than that, and it still manages to be metatextual. And actually, like you were saying, I think the key to it is unlocking it being a comment about what it is to be a sequel, and it's actually talking about the film itself and the process of making that film and taking that character and what it had become, which was a sort of kid-friendly thing, which it isn't, and you know, and it's a comment on the whole franchise.
Much like Gremlins 2. Right. Same thing, it's a sequel about the folly of sequels. Right. And I think Gremlins 2 does it better. Gremlins 2 is legitimately one of my favourite films. I think it's incredibly clever, and we'll get to that. But Robocop 2 is doing the same thing, perhaps not as well, and I think it's because everybody was doing it with kind of a gun to their head. You know, they had writer strike stuff, money stuff, they had all kinds of problems with it, and you know, that's kind of borne out in the end product. There is oddly, talking of the kind of, they sort of address, in a deleted scene, they kind of address like Robocop's sexuality or lack of thereof. There's a scene where
showers,
he just come and checks out a naked girl for a bit, and there's a feel, I think there's some extra Officer Duffy. Officer Duffy! Oh my! There's kind of, they kind of went there, but I guess they couldn't fit it in, and it's not. I think it's, in terms of its timing, it probably wouldn't have helped. But
and I don't really know what. Yeah, I mean, what does that add?
well, if it was before or after the wife scene, I think it makes sense. Because you're kind of saying like he's come to terms with like he doesn't have a dick. He's like a brain in a jar essentially, like a few chunks on a coroner slab.
Yeah, true. She does say that too.
Well, there you go. I think that's a good point to end. Is naked ladies and robots. We're going to be back with more soon. I implore you to go check out Robocop 2 again. A, if you hate it. B, if you like it. And C, if you haven't seen it. That's not again, that's just checking it out. Like and subscribe and pander to our needs for validation. And we'll see you again soon. Tatty bye. Bang.